Good evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. It's been a heck of a last few weeks and I am incredibly under the weather, but I didn't want to cancel last minute, especially since I had a little bit of a word I wanted to share with each one of you tonight. I'm not going to be on here long, but I wanted to come on because I'm in Washington, D.C., and for those who are in Washington, D.C., in California, and Portland, and Colorado, and certain cities in Tennessee and Texas, there have been a lot of issues, a lot of Georgia, there have been a lot of things Florida, there have been a lot of things going on that have caused a constant news cycle that has been stressful, has been overwhelming, and could cause you to veer into the path of despair. And I've talked about guarding your heart before. I've talked about what it means to try to focus on what is good. But tonight I'm going to talk about why. And like I said, I'm going to try to be brief. But what I noticed 10 years ago on social media was that there was a lot more good news. There was a lot more happiness. There were a lot fewer trolls, a lot fewer people that would find something rude and nasty to say, no matter what the post or the stance was. Today, you can just say, stop killing people. And they'd be like, well, maybe they deserve to die. Okay. So we're in a unique time and space, and social media, the news cycle, however you get your news, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's social media, whether it's even the newspapers at this point, the tenor has changed. The posts are more sensational. The taglines often do not represent the truth of the story. If you've ever clicked on a clickbait headline and realized when you read the article that the issue was completely misstated by the tagline, you know what I'm talking about. But I've told you guys before, and I'll say it again, I'm neurodivergent. And so I've always been a person who's sensitive to sensory overwhelm. And so tonight, that's what we're going to talk about. If this is your first time catching one of my lives, my name is Naomi. I go by the How-To Chick. I'm a child of God, a wife, a mom, an attorney, a coach, a mentor, a speaker, and a new author. And you can get a copy of my book, For His Glory, Disclosing and Destroying the Spiritual Roots of Codependency. It is available at my website. If you are international and you'd like a copy of my book, it is also available on Amazon. You must order on Amazon if you are international, but you can order from and should order from my website if you are in the continental United States. So tonight we're just talking about what it means to guard your heart and cultivating self-compassion. Like I said before, I'm neurodivergent, and I tend to get sensory overwhelm in places that are too loud, too crowded, too overwhelming. I took my family to Disney this summer, and I mean, almost every time I got home, I wanted to lock myself in the closet for a couple of hours. And I've navigated the disorientation of sensory overload. I know the impact it can have on your emotions. I've gone to therapy to deal with it and address it. But in this era of constant accessibility, of news that is not just coming at 6 o'clock and at 9 o'clock, but instead it's dinging right on our phones. We're getting notifications, and every headline sometimes can feel like a personal assault. I wanted to talk about what it means to guard your heart. There are some really important strategies that I've used to navigate the challenges of some sensory overwhelm while maintaining objectivity and being grounded. Because what we can see from just looking around us is that the constant overwhelm, the constant amping up of rhetoric, the constant availability of news sources, the harshness of the critiques that we see online, even if we understand that many of these are bot accounts that are being paid to create havoc and to cause hate, really, they are being paid to wreak havoc, to cause division. Most people are genuinely nice and kind people. Yes, there are racist people. Yes, there are sexist people. Yes, there are xenophobes. But I would argue that those numbers have increased dramatically over the last 10 years as people have been pushed further and further into their own bubbles. However, Today, when talking about guarding the heart, I simply wanted to remind us that constant accessibility, constantly reading and experiencing and interacting with new news stories, with the headlines, with everything that is coming out, and every hot take that someone has on a topic is actually very detrimental to your nervous system. And it can cause, I'm gonna be completely honest here, it can cause a degradation in the level of empathy that individuals have. This is why staying in bubbles is not actually the flex we think it is. So, while it's important to cultivate self compassion, it's also important to recognize the import of doing what Philippians 6 and 7 tell us, to focus on things that are true, that are noble, that are lovely, that are of a good report. If there's virtue and if there's praise, to think on these things. So, what I worked to do with my sensory overload was to actually figure out the relationship between my emotions and my sensory overload. And what it actually is an experience that happens between our brain and the world when our brains become overwhelmed with too many sights, too many sounds, too many voices, too many opinions. And because there is constant consumption, constant accessibility, it becomes overwhelming. And we are unable to process our true feelings as a result, and our body begins to reject it. So what happens is our nervous system becomes bombarded by all of this sensory information, and it disrupts the balance. It's like, I don't know. I'm very old school. I actually just got rid of a boom box I'd had for 20 years. A few years ago, my husband was like, "You don't use it, get rid of it." I was very upset. I still wish I'd kept that. I think that would have been a good thing to have, but neither here nor there. If you've ever had like a boom box that have multiple speakers, you know, like you can balance them or you can just turn them all the way up. That's what happens when you're in sensory overload. It's all the way up. It's firing on all circuits. You cannot hear, you cannot focus, your whole body is shaking. The only time that works is when there's 200 people in the room and you're trying to create a certain type of experience. When we flood our brains with stimuli like that, regulating our behaviors and our emotions becomes super, super difficult. And our stress responses, which are really reactions, because we don't take the time to think and process how to respond in a helpful and wholesome way. We are literally reacting. They take over until we get back to a place where our body feels safe. This is why you find yourself getting into dopamine fueled arguments with bots on social media. This is why you start to feel anxious and overwhelmed after you've read the news, and anything that people come and say and ask you, you're responding snappily and you're not able to regulate. Sensory triggers do vary from person to person, but common triggers include, for me, it's loud noises, bright lights, and high frequency or too many sounds with crowded spaces. Now, in this day and age, and for a lot of people, the most common trigger is too much information or too many external stimuli coming at you at once, or too much task switching. So social media, switching from, I don't know which apps you use. I've tried to limit my use, but we have TikTok and Twitter and Threads and Instagram and Facebook. And sometimes when we're doom scrolling, when we're trying to distract ourselves, we're going from one to the other, to the other, to the other. That is a stimulus, and it's affecting your nervous system. And for some, a single trigger can be enough to push you into a state of full-blown overload. For other people, it requires a combination. For me, I have to have limits on my social media. I have about an hour a day that I'm allowed to be, participating or, on social media outside of what I do for business. But I also have had to regulate my news. So I usually get my news from NPR, and I used to listen to it on the radio. For the past 8 years, maybe a little longer, I have not been able to listen to it. I go to read it, so that if a story is too much, if it's too overwhelming, I just click off of it and I go back to it at a time when I'm able to deal with it. And I want you to learn, and I want to convey to you the symptoms of sensory overload in your life, because many times people don't recognize, they wonder why they have a heightened sense of anxiety. They wonder why they're irritable when their spouse or their child or the coworker is asking them questions. They wonder why they're restless and they cannot focus on a task, why they have difficulty concentrating, why they get pain, like inexplicable muscle pains, and difficulty regulating their emotions, paralysis in decision making, meltdowns, shutdowns, needing to go sit in the car to process any of this ringing a bell. I will say that it is different again for every single person, but these symptoms or some combination thereof are very, very common. And they're your body's way of letting you know you've had too much. And it's super important for you to be in touch with your body enough to know what it is that you've had too much of, right? So what happens to your emotions when you're in this state is you don't have as much patience. You cannot control yourself. So you're not in a space where you can say, maybe this person didn't mean it like that, and I should ask them for clarification. No, you're immediately reacting. You're immediately going off. We see that on social media. Sometimes we'll even feel like, oh, the person was justified because that person was rude or that person was racist. But are we listening to understand or are we listening to respond? So many of us are so wound tight that we are experiencing reactionary emotions immediately and quickly. And we're not even processing what we're reacting to in many cases. And we have more difficulty turning our emotions down to a level where we don't feel so anxious, overwhelmed, and on edge. Sensory overload causes negative emotions such as anxiety, frustration, and anger. Because when we're overwhelmed, our sensory inputs and our nervous system go into fight or flight mode. And I say this all the time, but I need you to understand that so many of us have been living in fight or flight mode, and it's not healthy and it's not normal. And it actually will age you and wear your body down. So when the brain is receiving too much information, making decisions is challenging. This makes you confused, anxious, and frustrated. And if you respond to your overload by actually reacting, typically that's a blow up or just doing something that you wouldn't ordinarily do, like spending a bunch of money, or you're like, I need to go to the spa, I need to go get a massage. You respond to it in a way that's outsized as well. But then as soon as you do that, instead of feeling better and more regulated, you actually experience, if this has happened to you, tell me in the comments, you experience a wave of exhaustion and you feel like foggy, like you don't even understand what's happening around you. And it's faux relaxation, right? Because you look emotionally calm, but the body is actually frozen in a stressed state because you have reacted instead of reasonably responding. And your reaction was, this may not be the same for everyone, because for me, I love going to a good float, sensory deprivation chamber and doing a float. I love going to get a nice massage. But if I do that as a reaction to one small thing that pushed me over the edge, and let's just say I didn't have it in my budget that week, while I'm doing it, I'm literally detaching because I am so anxious about my finances in that moment that I can't even enjoy the sensory deprivation experience. And I am not actually allowing my body to regulate. So that's the difference between reacting and responding. This has a significant effect on our emotional well-being. Significant. Stress and anxiety are two of the most detrimental things for our body's health. So to navigate it well, we have to acknowledge what our triggers are. We have to know what the sensory inputs are that are causing the dysregulation. So if you're up till 3 and 4 a.m. scrolling and reading every news story because you're a Fed and you want to know what's going on with your agency and you don't want to get up and turn on your computer and check your email, or you're only allowed to check your email once a week on Thursday at 3 o'clock and now you have to wait all week to do that, you're actually feeding that dysregulation. So if we are able to manage the sensory environment, identify our triggers, and implement self-soothing strategies, we can create calm even in the midst of a difficult situation. And you guys know I'm unapologetically a God girl. There's a scripture that I love. Sorry. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Don't fear, because I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will uphold you, and I will help you. I will strengthen you, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And that's in Isaiah 41:10. And I'm sorry, guys, I am definitely sick and losing my voice, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. But if you are experiencing sensory overload, and a lot of us are, you have to craft a sensory safety plan. And that, for me, has been putting on my screen time guards on all my social media. I only get an hour on my social media. That is turning off my news notifications so I don't get a pop-up every time the president issues an executive order or the Speaker of the House, has a press conference to talk about why he's not bringing the House back in session to vote on a budget bill. I don't get those notifications. I don't get those notifications because I recognize that those are triggers for me and I do not need them. I used to have, at one point in my life, a Google alert set up for everything about my job because I didn't want to miss anything, right? And it was important for me to be on top of it. Turned those off years ago. Why? Because my job gets sued every few months and it was a trigger for me. So your plan has to be personal to you. You have to recognize what your trigger is and why your trigger is what it is, and then you have to implement reasonable steps to ensure that you are protecting your nervous system. These are strategies, but these are also accommodations, and they help you to thrive even in challenging sensory environments. I started a lot of this back in 2016, and in 2015 is when I first experienced this, when the current president was running for his first term. I was working in a prosecutor's office. I was working with a bunch of people who were very much in favor of the administration that won the presidency, and who had a lot of strong opinions about other people. That we see those voices have gotten louder and louder and louder, but at the time it was super overwhelming. And so I recognized at that point I needed to implement strategies to protect my mental peace. And part one of those was I was not going to argue with people or talk politics in public. I do not exist to change people's mind. 1. 2, I was not going to engage with the news that was talking about the things that people were saying about the president or about his opponent in that race. I was not going to engage with those. I turned those off. Whatever your trigger is, you need to be honest with yourself about it and develop a safety plan. A sensory lens means you have to see the world through your experience. You have to recognize the influence of your triggers on your nervous system. And so it's important also, and if you suffer from anxiety like myself, sometimes it'll take you a long time to recognize that what you're dealing with is sensory overload. You may think it's just anxiety. But in most cases, especially in this day and age, if you are watching television, if you are on social media, if you are engaging in conversations, if you are in a hostile work environment, or if you are connected to a government employer of, federal government employer or contractor, or if you have friends or loved ones who are dealing with immigration issues, you are probably heavily triggered. It's not your anxiety. You need to recognize when you start feeling irritable and overwhelmed, when you get a little touchy. You need to identify the specific sensory needs, your triggers, and your preferences for dealing with those triggers. I've had to tell people, and I have a good friend, and she's like, listen, I am on a news fast. I don't want to talk about anything in the news today. I can respect that. I mean, it's easy for me because I'm there. But I mean, in many instances, we're going into conversations and we want to talk about the next thing we saw, the next reel we shared, the next thing we're seeing about what's going on in Palestine or Gaza or Sudan or Uganda. And we don't realize that we're actually contributing to our own triggering. So we have to advocate for ourselves and communicate our sensory needs to other people and implement strategies to regulate our own central nervous system and find balance. I would wager that probably the most helpful thing I did was to incorporate sensory activities and rituals into my daily routine. I wake up every single day to an affirmation that I recorded in my own voice that helps me to ground myself for the day. I do 5 to 10 minutes of meditation at least 3 days a week, in which I meditate on the Word of God. And I have implemented self-care routines into my life, walking, going outside. When I'm at work, I will go up on the roof and walk around if the weather is good. When I'm at home, sometimes I'll go outside and walk around the park if the weather is good. It is important to self-regulate and understand that it is so important for you to be mindful and be present in your body so that you understand your sensory environment and what your triggers are. Because many of us are reacting. And reactive people, triggered people trigger people. Reactive people cause other people to react. And we are living in a day and time where people are all on edge. And you know what they say, everybody's going through something, be kind. But sometimes we feel entitled to our emotions because we are so overstimulated and overwhelmed. I want to encourage you, whether you're neurodivergent or not, to look at your sensory triggers and make yourself a plan to self-regulate. Remember, your focus needs to be on things that are good, things that are true, things that are noble, things that are of a good report. Yes, life is going to go on around you. You have to consume your news. You need to know what's going on, but when can you safely do that? How much can you consume? And do you need to have conversations about it or go down rabbit holes about it? I would wager you do not. It is so important that we guard our hearts, that we protect our minds, that we not become those triggered and hurting people who hurt other people, because that is what this world is becoming, and it's a vicious cycle. Guarding your heart is what the Holy Spirit, what the Bible encourages us to do. And the most important way that we can do that is by recognizing our triggers, by focusing on what is good, and by trusting in the God who has never failed. Isaiah 41:10, do not fear, do not fear. I am with you and I will help you and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So I'm living this life along with the rest of you. I encourage you to remember you can do anything, but you cannot do everything. Choose wisely. And part of that may be deciding what you cannot do, what you cannot consume, what you cannot engage with in this season. And when you do that, you will get to a place of greater emotional regulation. You will get to a place of greater peace, a place of greater joy, a place of hope. I would wager that there are people living in circumstances far worse than ours who experience joy every single day. It is possible. In this world, we will have trouble, but we can take heart because we know the one who overcame the world. Be blessed, and I hope to see you next week for Wisdom Wednesday. Good night.